Good evening, everyone. We continue our study in the book of Ezekiel. We're in chapter 9, and it's a continuation from chapter 8. So, by way of review, if you take a look at the last verse, you find that the people will be crying into God's ears with a loud voice, and God will not hear them. And that is where we left off in chapter 8. When we get to chapter 9, and it begins, and then this time round, God calls out in my hearing with a loud voice. This is a contrast. The people calls out to God, I will not hear them. Now, God calls out in my hearing, and this would be Ezekiel's hearing with a loud voice. And then God speaks to Ezekiel. Let those who have charge over the city draw near, each with a deadly weapon in his hand. Now, we need to understand that this deadly weapon, the weapon of destruction, would be a better way of looking at this. Weapon of destruction. The whole idea here is the focus is on the destruction using an instrument. And of course, in the old days, they don't have guns and bombs. This would be really a weapon used in the hand. Now, those who have charge over the city literally means those who have been given the mandate, the mission to go in, the mission perhaps to destroy the city. And so now we begin by looking at what has happened in chapter 8. Now, if you recall in chapter 8, the people, the house of Judah, the house of Israel, both in the vicinity of the temple, in the court, in the hidden places, have been practicing idolatry, pretending to be pious, but really doing things against God in secret. Now, if you recall, in Ecclesiastes chapter 12, right? Ecclesiastes chapter 12, and in verse 13 tells us that God will judge them for what they do, whether in the open or in secret. And we are now given the understanding that God has seen them practicing idolatry in secret. And God says, I will not hear them. And then when it leads down to chapter 9, we find that God is now speaking to Ezekiel with a loud voice. And think of it this way. This is like in frustration, in anger. And it is for Ezekiel's purpose. And God says, now he is going to send in those who have a weapon of destruction in the hand, coming in to do destruction. Verse 2, and behold, 6 men came from the direction of the upper gate, which faces north. And this is to give us an indication. And in this case, north will point to Babylon. And so these are metaphorical people that God says, I am going to send in 6 of them. And these 6 of them will come each with his battle axe in hand. Now, this idea of battle axe is not quite explaining this word. So let me just bring it out here. This word really means a tool for shattering, In other words, there's another translation here that says this is like a sledgehammer. This is what we call the weapon for destruction. It is something that is used to smash things, right? Is to use to smash into pieces. So think of it this way. These are weapons of destruction, just like what is being described here. He says, one man among them was clothed with linen and had a righteous inkhorn at his side. Now, this, well, I guess you can think of it this way. It's not very much a righteous inkhorn. I think you could say that he has a scribal tablet. Not an inkhorn, a scribal tablet would be best understood. Something that he is going to write with and is at his hip. So at his side. All right. And so we have 6 men with a sledgehammer and 1 man with a writing tablet. So now we have 7 men right here. They went in and stood beside the bronze altar. Now, one of the things that we need to realize is the bronze altar or a copper altar was in the time of the tabernacle. In 1 Kings chapter 7, we find that this is now a stone altar. And here in verse 3, we find that the glory of God had gone up from the cherub, which is inside the Holy of Holies. The glory of the God of Israel is also referred to as a Shekinah, which depicts the presence of God. And so in the Holy of Holies, we find that there is the Ark of the Covenant. And with the Ark of the Covenant, then there is 2 cherubs with the wings facing each other, touching each other. And that would be the mercy seat, which depicts the throne seat of God. But here it says, the Shekinah glory of God had gone up from the cherub where it had been to the threshold of the temple. Now, in this this word temple literally means the house, right? The house. And of course, we will see this as a house of God. And he called to the man clothed with linen, which is the scribe, who had the writer's tablet at his hip, not an inkhorn, but a tablet. And God said to him, go through the midst of the city, through the midst of Jerusalem, and put a mark on the forehead of the men who sigh and cry over all the abominations that are done within it. Now, this word here, in terms of a mark on the forehead, I think it requires us to understand the Hebrew a little bit. This word here in verse 4, it is to paint a path. This word here, put a mark, right? We need to understand this. Put Mark literally means to cause, right? To cause a mark that is a tav. Now, this is the Hebrew. It is to write onto the forehead the letter tav. So this is the mark. This is the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And so put a mark literally means to put a tav. Now, in the ancient days, the tav is like that. It's like a crosshair, right? A cross stick. That's like X marks the spot. And so this is the possible marking that is on the forehead of the man who has been crying and sighing over all the abominations, which is actually idolatry, in the midst of them that's happening in Jerusalem. Now, this is a sad case because much of everyone is actually practicing idolatry and Hamas. And there are those who are crying that what is happening to Jerusalem? So, verse 4 is really talking about setting apart those who are the remnants of the faithful. So, we are told that these are remnants of the faithful. And that's how we would read the text this way. And verse 5 says, and then to the others, he said, in my hearing, that he, to his hearing, go after him through the city and kill. Do not let your eyes spare nor have pity. That's very similar to the end of chapter 5. Utterly slay old and young and maidens and little children and women. Now, this is something which most people will find it difficult because it's like a complete, utter destroying of all the people in Jerusalem. And says here, do not come near anyone whom the mark is there. Now, this word, the mark, again in verse 6, literally says the word, the letter tav, which is the cross sticks. And if they have a mark, then they are spared. So this idea of sparing is very much similar to Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, if you find 10 righteous people in Sodom and Gomorrah, God will not destroy the city. And so, to be fair, those who are righteous, God will mark them out. And God says, begin the destruction in my sanctuary, in the place. So they began with the elders who were before the temple, who were worshiping the sun and bowing down. And then he said to them, and these are the 6 men with sledgehammer, defile the temple and fill the courts with the slain, go out. And these are instructions to tell the 6 to destroy and kill in the cities. Now, what is this? These are all in a vision, remember? It is in a vision that speaks of utter destruction. Now, it's interesting that you find that the Shekinah, which is in the Holy of Holies, has come out to the threshold. Now, what does this mean? Now, we didn't cover that just now, but I just want to really help us understand that this is the initial movement of God leaving. The threshold would be the place where it is at the main door of the temple. So what we find is you find God moving from the Holy of Holies to the outer door of the temple. This is to signify that God is prepared to leave the temple. This is something which is worth our thinking through. The people in Jerusalem and in the temple never ever thought God would leave, and they would think that God would be always there to protect his house. And so whatever they do in secret would not be seen, and that the Babylonians will never come in to destroy the place. Now, chapter 9 gives us a glimpse in a vision to Ezekiel that God is prepared to leave. And this vision of the 6 men with sledgehammer to destroy the city is starting to kill everyone. And this is a picture that men, women, and children are going to be destroyed by the impending doom of the Babylonians. And God here also talks about sparing the faithful remnant. Now, these are all part and parcel of the vision. Now we come to verse 8. Verse 8 says, and then, this word so is and then. This is what happened. That while they were killing them, these are the 6, them would be the men, women, and children. I was left alone. And then, this is the word, and then, I fell on my face. And then, I cried out. And then, you notice there's a lot of sequential actions. I said, what did I say? This word is an exclamation. Atta. Oh, Adonai Jehovah, will you destroy all the remnant of Israel in pouring out your fury on Jerusalem? Ezekiel is seeing this vision. The vision is the destruction of Jerusalem. Verse 9. It says, and then upon Ezekiel asking God the question, he said to me, this is what God said, the iniquity of the house of Israel and the house of Judah is exceedingly great. Now, this idea of iniquity is avon. It talks about the perversion of the Torah. In the front, they are practicing the Torah. They go to the temple, they make offerings, but at the back, quietly, they are bowing down to the sun. They are having all these idols on the walls. They're doing all kinds of things that is called abomination, disgusting things. So that is the avon of the house of Israel and the house of Judah. Remember, these are both the northern and southern. The northern have come down after the earlier destruction. They are still doing abomination. And God says this is exceedingly great. He says, and the land is full of bloodshed. Now, this word full of bloodshed will be violence, Hamas. And the city is full of perversity, crookedness. The idea of crookedness is perversion, distortion, turning what is right into wrong, what the Torah is teaching to bend it. All these things is called perversity. Basically saying, well, whatever God says to do, we are doing it in a way where, it looks like we're doing it, but we're not quite doing it all. And then they say that Jehovah has forsaken the land and that God does not see. Now, what does this mean? This is something as a repeat of chapter 8. Their view is God has left the land alone. And God does not see. God is blind to all these things. And that's what they are saying. So whatever they're doing, they don't really care about God. They will do it pretending that God doesn't see. And so God says, this is a terrible deed. Will you destroy all the remnant of Israel? Now, what is this remnant? These are those who are not in exile. Not many of them, and yet God says they are still doing all these things. It's not about the number anymore. It's about their loyalty and their faithfulness. And so, even for me, my eye will neither spare. Now, this word spare essentially is to look with compassion. Look with compassion. Nor will I have pity. Now, this is another word. The idea here is chamal, which is to spare them and to pity them, right? To spare or pity. A different word. And so you would have this as an A and a B. God says, I don't care. Now, the last part here is this. In verse 10, he says, I have placed their way on their head. Now, this expression, I will recompense their deed on their own head, should be understood as I have placed, or I will place their way on their own head. God is going to hold them, repay them, give them, recompense them, pay back their wages of whatever they have done, and it's on their own head. What this means is very clear. The punishment is on them who committed the sins, who committed the perversion. Now, this is important because it is to let us know that God is just. God has tolerated everything they have done. God has progressively punished the southern kingdom. So you have the first wave of Nebuchadnezzar's siege with Jehoiakim. And Jehoiakim would be to take away Daniel and his friends. And then the second wave with Jehoiakim that will take away Ezekiel. However, we have not arrived in the third wave because God is progressively teaching them. And even after the second wave of the siege, the people continued to sin against God with impunity, meaning God has seen all their perversion, all their killing, all their bloodshed, all their Hamas. and idolatry. And God says, I have enough of whatever they are doing. So in the time of Zedekiah, which will be down the road, not that long from here in this prophecy, God says, I will have to terminate everything that they have done, men, women, and children, because the third siege will be the worst of the sieges, and everyone will be destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar. And that is the prophecy here. And as Ezekiel looks at this and asks God, will you also kill everybody who is left in Jerusalem? And the answer is yes. Why? Because of their sins. Why? Because God is just. And why? Because God has his patience ended. Why? Is because they think that God will not see, God doesn't care, God is blind. And God says, yes, I will show you. I will be blind to your cry of help. And so chapter 9 is in preparation of God leaving the temple and Jerusalem. And it's a serious situation which Ezekiel sees as something that is terrifying. Verse 11, the last verse of this chapter says, just then, the man clothed with linen who had the, not inkhorn, the tablet at his side, came and reported back, I have done as you have commanded me to mark the people. What is happening is that all these, that seventh man that has the scribal tablet has gone on to look at everyone who is righteous, to make sure that when God comes and destroy and allow Babylon to destroy the city, that the righteous people will be kept. And apparently, based on a lot of commentaries, that this man came back and they found none, right? They found none. Now, what had happened is the people who are loyal apparently has already been taken away to Babylon. Daniel and his friends, Ezekiel and a number of these people, they have been removed from Jerusalem. These are the righteous remnants, and those who are still there with Zedekiah are people who think that God has ignored and left the land and is blind, can't see what they're doing. And hence, when it came to the point in time, God is preparing to leave the temple and to leave the city. And so with this, at the end of chapter 9, we are seeing the positioning of the glory of the God of Israel about to leave the place. This is unthinkable. In Jewish history, in the history of Israel, they can never ever fathom the thought of God leaving his house, of God leaving his appointed place, because in their mind, God will never leave. But in chapter 9, we are beginning to see in the vision that is given to Ezekiel that that's not the case. And so it is a terrifying thought to Ezekiel himself. And with this, we come to the end of chapter 9.